Some would say New York is the cultural capital of the world. It's no doubt a city of great art, the birthplace of modernism, and it's certainly a magnet for eccentricity. Some decades ago, out of Gotham's urban canyon, there emerged a rare bird, and her song startled even the less discerning among us. Florence Foster Jenkins. Even so long after her death, her recordings, remarkable testimonials of her particular art, still outsell those of many more celebrated vocalists. My acquaintance with Madame Jenkins began in 1944, when I learned she would give a recital at Carnegie Hall, no less. I asked her for an interview, and she consented. The hotel where she resided doesn't look anything like what it did in those days, but there still might be some connection.
Yes, I am a New Yorker, my background being Holland, Dutch, and English, but I have lived here almost all my life. Will you take tea, Mr. Key, or would you like a drink? Oh, how kind of you to write about me. Now then, how can I help you? But first tell me, how did you hear about my recital?
It was in the paper.
Oh, which one? The journal? Oh, I didn't see that one yet. I do hope they got the date and the time correct. Have you heard me before?
I've not yet had the pleasure, but I've heard so much about you.
Oh.
She was the world's worst singer and didn't realize it.
She said, I want to do this, I have the money now to do it, and I'm gonna do it.
She was a monster of vanity. And it's a damn good story. It's unbelievable, but it's true. There's something about Florence Foster Jenkins singing that's funny, and it's difficult to put your finger on exactly what it is. I love the fact that Florence Foster Jenkins introduced into the world of music a sense of humor. She didn't mean to do that, but she's dead and it doesn't matter. I treasure her records because they make me smile.
I think it was a shock of disbelief that someone could sing like this, but I got over the shock very quickly, and even over the fun element very quickly, and was drawn into something that went way beyond just funny opera, just funny sounds. There was a tragedy that I heard.
She was a woman who thought that she was an excellent opera singer who was not, according to her audience. However, she was very devoted to her art and to her audience. And if she was giving people joy, and if she was enlightening them, and if they were spending an evening with music and tableau vivant and poetry and dance, what better way to spend your life's time?
These tableaux vivants of hers were the talk of the town, but I always wondered how she truly conceived of herself.
obviously, she didn't hear her own voice the way other people heard it.
Great singers have told you that what you hear is not what they hear. They hear something different going on in their minds. So it's possible that she thought that what she was hearing was not what you were hearing. And what she was hearing was pure and correct and of very high caliber.
Well, I might say that every number was memorable, the way she performed it. She added histrionics to every number, generally acting the action if it were an aria, or other appropriate action if it were a descriptive song, or else she would go into different dances during these numbers, which were extremely hilarious.
Do you love opera, Mr. Key? I think it's wonderful that young people today are so interested in my music. So you are a musician then? My husband and I are always tremendously interested in young musicians. Some of those we've helped have gone on to very promising careers. I'm sure you'll hear of them in the future. But now we have wasted entirely enough time on others, Mr. Key. I do believe you asked to interview me.
Do forgive me, Madam Jenkins. Yes, about your concert at Carnegie Hall next week.
Well, you are, of course, attending.
I wished, but how might I obtain tickets?
I was fascinated by her Carnegie Hall plans. And wouldn't you know it, her performance was to become a smash.
She considered herself a musician. And knowing the history of Carnegie Hall, it's usually most musicians' dream to appear here. It's very interesting. From the very beginning, when we established the archives in 1986, requests for information about Florence Foster Jenkins are among the top 5 requests of all time. We hear requests about Judy Garland and about the Beatles and about the Benny Goodman concert, and right there with them is Florence Foster Jenkins. She would have loved it.
If you look at the repertoire that she sang, it's gigantic.
She was in an accident in a taxi and it made her hit a high F, the screaming, from being in the taxi, and so she thought she was even a better singer than before.
It's not a self-parody. You hear that she's dead serious about it.
Fascinating. To me, it's just fascinating.
She didn't understand what she was doing. That ignorance did not stop her.
I wondered what was really going on here. Did she simply live blindly in a fool's paradise, encouraged by a cynical audience? And was her unique career in store for a disastrous final curtain?
Madame Jenkins was born in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania around 1868, and of very wealthy parents. But very early she demonstrated this desire to sing, and her parents objected to the excruciating quality of her voice. Therefore, during the whole lifetime of her father, she did not sing, but she had this terrific repression.
She comes from an old line family that were part of the original pioneer settlers of the Wilkes-Barre area, and a family that did very well over time. So she goes to the best church, lives on the best street, goes to the best female private school. So it would play into her later life of being a very special young lady. Before there even is such thing as called feminism, before women have the right to vote, but it's the wealth that will do it, combined with an eccentric personality, that I would probably say gives her the confidence to be the way she is. And then, of course, she moves to the center of the universe, to New York City, where then, in my mind, she recreates herself into this very eccentric socialite and diva for New York.
beginning of her career, she used to disport herself, despite the fact that she was an ungainly and ugly woman, in tableaux vivants, in which she impersonated great heroines in history. And it's a little embarrassing to think of now, but it happened.
She only thought of making other people happy. She gave so much happiness to the women and men who got lovely music and flowers and beautiful surroundings at the concerts that she sponsored. That's why I think it's so unkind, so unfair, all this ridicule of her.
The relationship between Jenkins and St. Clair Bayfield seems to have had a sadomasochistic nature. Maybe not sexually, but certainly he was very attracted to domineering women. And boy, he had one in Florence Foster Jenkins.
He was very handsome. And he had this smooth British accent, I'm sure, and had an angular face, and he was younger than she was, and she needed an escort, an appropriate escort to go to certain places.
He worked his fingers to the bone helping her, and he was the secret weapon that lent an air of professionalism to what she did, because she would have seemed entirely ridiculous without his input. She loved to have people look at her. She wore fantastic outfits that had no relationship to anything anybody else ever wore anywhere.
I think today's jargon, you might say she looked almost like a drag queen.
It was camp, but it was high camp, and that's what she is high camp, you see. So see, there's good camp and there's bad camp, and she was good camp because she really believed in it and what she was doing.
There is an essay by Susan Sontag called Essay on Camp. In that essay from the 1960s, she describes that great camp art is only great if it takes itself seriously. So if you think it's funny what you're doing, the effect is not going to be the same as when you're totally convinced that this is the real thing. And I think Florence Foster Jenkins is a perfect example of someone who is an exponent of camp art without wanting to be camp.
Gira, gira, ogni coppia cerco va, già s'avanza, si ritira, e all'assalto tornerà. Gira, gira, ogni coppia cerco va, già s'avanza, si ritira, e all'assalto tornerà. Già s'avanza, si ritira, e all'assalto tornerà. Serra, serra, collo piombo d'ogni mia venite ma son nel secondo a ciascuna toccherà. Vive il tondo, tondo, sono un resto rovesciato, il più bel piacere del mondo, la più cara volontà. Mamma mia, mamma mia, mamma mia, si salterà. Mamma mia, mamma mia, mamma mia, si salterà. Frinche, 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 mamma mia, si salterà. Frinche, 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 mamma mia, si salterà.
she gets up there and sings her arias because she believes in herself that she is the greatest soprano of all time. It's a delusion, but it's a fascinating delusion. I mean, it's like Norma Desmond in Sunset Boulevard, who still thinks she is the greatest living diva of all time, and she doesn't get that the world's laughing at her. And that's why I think people are fascinated with Norma Desmond and with Florence Foster Jenkins.
Your audiences love you.
Oh, yes, they do. My husband tells me after every performance how happy everyone was. I have heard some laughing after some of my performances, but it came from those hoodlums.
Which hoodlums?
The hoodlums planted in the audience by the enemies, of course.
Her voice was nothing but a squeak. People laughed heartily at her singing. I could never understand why St. Clair felt attracted to her. Naturally, he had some good times being her escort, but she stole 36 years of the best years of St. Clair's life, 14 of which I waited for him.
Whatever else St. Clair Bayfield was for her, he most certainly was her private archivist. I discovered his records much later at the New York Public Library. Bayfield collected each and every mention of her and meticulously saved all in a massive scrapbook, a document of her, well, unique career.
The main vehicle for her pushing her career was the network of clubs, ladies' clubs, of which there were hundreds.
And then, of course, Florence herself started the Verdi Club to show her devotion to Giuseppe Verdi.
Her principal activity was sponsoring the musical programs of various clubs, with both work and money. The Verdi Club cost her $2,000 a year. People always wondered why she paid the members of the Verdi Club.
Today, you can be crazy, it's accepted socially, you can be very successful doing so, but it's not such an enormous crusade, not such an enormous personal achievement that Florence Foster Jenkins has, and so I think that she eclipses Lady Gaga and all the other sort of modern day pop divas by far, because it took her so much more personal strength to get to where she was. And I think that shines through every note that she puts on her discs, and it shines through every moment and every photo that you see from her, that this is not just, oh, I'm going to do something crazy for my fans. She does it for herself.
I have made quite a number of recordings, you know. The demand has been so great that I've been forced to continue. I go to that little recording studio on Central Park West. Such kind people. At first they were surprised that I would record a single song just once. But I think if you don't get it correct on the first time, you can't possibly do it any better on the second. So I don't find recording anywhere near the trial most singers do.
I've heard some of your records. I found them really extraordinary.
Oh, how kind you are. Which one is your favorite?
Like a bird I am singing.
Flatterer. You're just saying that because, of course, you know I wrote the poem. But I do think it was set to music quite beautifully and with great sensitivity for the particular capacities of my voice.
Would you say, Madam Jenkins, that an operatic voice is not just a gift, but can be also acquired by hard work.
A voice must be discovered. A voice of beauty is a joy forever. And all can learn to sing through marvelous discovery. But you must pay attention to the true facts of your voice and your possibilities.
The company that made her records, Melotone Records, was a kind of a vanity recording outfit. And Melotone made records to order for money. The reason they were made is because of Florence's vanity. She thought that her art should be memorialized. But she didn't really have any idea about how a record company worked. The woman who ran the company gave an interview in which she told the story of how Madame Jenkins called her and asked if she thought maybe they should redo one of the records because there was one note she thought that wasn't absolutely perfect. And the woman told Jenkins, "Oh no, there's nothing you could do to improve these records. These are absolutely perfect." And that satisfied Jenkins, and it's very difficult to tell which note it is on that record that bothered her.
Can I ask your expertise as a vocalist, Madam Jenkins?
By all means.
I overheard occasionally that there are some singers who hear their own voice in a different way than the audience does. I wonder if this is true and what the difference could be.
What in the world are you suggesting?
I mean, would it be possible that some singers' consciousness of the own voice is rather imaginary?
Why on earth would a singer imagine their own voice and hear something entirely different than the public? You would do well to forget such a preposterous theory, young man.
Yes, of course, madam. Silly of me to suggest such a thing.
Indeed. I think I'll take a little break now.
Her first marriage with Frank Thornton Jenkins had been unhappy. It always surprised me that she reverted to his name, considering also that her doctor husband had given her a dose of syphilis.
When I read that she contracted syphilis from her husband, her first husband, I was quite fascinated by this because basically it's a very tragic thing to happen, especially at that time when the treatment for syphilis was complicated and you lose your hair, it can blacken your teeth, as it did with Oscar Wilde, for example, or Ludwig II, King of Bavaria. So it was not an easy thing to get over with. Some people claim that her tone deafness and her lack of rhythm were caused by the syphilis. But I think maybe it went beyond that, that this dementia that she had in a way, or that she portrayed on stage, was caused by the illness.
She really didn't hear the atrocious pitches in these things. She used to sit delightedly and listen for hours to her recordings.
Joy of the morning, the river is flowing, there's a silvery wave on the crystalline bay, to the notes of your flute, the shady groves yearning. My thoughts of you bring me sweet memories thrilling.
Cadence is melting in music divine. Bring a vision so pleasant, the smile that is thine. Inspiration comes near when your music is heard. In fondest endeavor, you sing like a bird.
Like a bird, I am singing
Up above on the wing, like a bird, like a
I didn't know you were... You look...
I plan on wearing it for the second half of the performance. I thought you might appreciate a sneak peek. But of course there will be added accessories for the performance.
It certainly will stun the audience. Did you design this on your own?
I design almost all my dresses, silly. Are you married, Mr. Key?
I beg your pardon?
Are you married?
Excuse me, madam, but No, I'm not.
Oh, it's perfectly okay. Many of my friends are not married and have a great sensibility for the world of fashion. How they admire my performances. Oh, before I forget, how many tickets do you need? This will get you in, you and your friend, free of charge, naturally. But I wondered if you might do me a favor. I shall sing like a bird as an encore, and I was hoping you might bring me just a few flowers.
I certainly will, Madam Jenkins.
Living on a pittance back then, I didn't manage to buy any flowers. Burdened with a broken promise, I was stung with remorse. And all the more so, as it turned out, this most ambitious performance would also be her last.
I think the Carnegie Hall concert was the apotheosis of her vanity. She had achieved almost everything she wanted to, except to be accepted among the ranks of international performing musicians. She had remained just sort of the club lady who sang.
You would pay Carnegie Hall the rent and tell us what you require in terms of stage hands and ushers and security and lights, but then the rest is up to you. The interesting thing is, it was very difficult to sell out Carnegie Hall.
I was supposed to play for her that night, and when I approached the hall, I could hardly get near it because the crowd stretched all the way to the little Carnegie and around 7th Avenue, and you could hardly mill through them.
Carnegie Hall was filled to capacity. People were flourishing $20 bills to even get into the hall. She tottered onto the stage. One wondered if she'll ever make it. But she gripped the side of the grand piano and then pulled herself up and sang.
I knew what to expect. And I didn't prejudge her. There was something special about her, and she was so sincere that some of that rubbed off onto you, that you had to also respect her for the fact that she was a true believer.
It's remarkable that a woman who was making her Carnegie Hall debut, who had money, didn't document it. Really, all we do have is the program from that night and the one photo that we've seen that's at the collection of the New York Public Library. And you see in the photograph, it's not Florence Foster Jenkins, but the audience. So it all looks like they're having a wonderful time possibly talking about what they just experienced in between change.
The concert went on with the most noisy and abandoned applause that I have never seen such a scene, either a bullfight or at the Yale Bowl after a winning touchdown. And she loved that.
From what I remember, every time she gave a recital, there were no critics allowed. So you don't find any reviews of her concerts, you know, except for the one at Carnegie Hall.
Florence Foster Jenkins' debut recital at Carnegie Hall was one of the weirdest mass jokes New York has ever seen.
Florence Foster Jenkins' debut recital at Carnegie Hall was one of the weirdest mass jokes New York has ever seen.
Mrs. Florence Foster Jenkins can sing anything but notes.
A recital without voice. Madam Jenkins has perfected the art of giving out its
The tones Madam Jenkins produced were tiny.
To the point of disappearing.
Making this possible.
Her singing gave us more of a kick than
Vodka or marijuana.
She swoops and hoots her notes like a cuckoo in its cups.
like a cuckoo in its cups.
She hit only a few notes. The rest was promissory.
She should not have read the reviews. A lot of singers and actors tell you not to read the reviews. She made a mistake by reading the reviews, I think.
Apparently, she went into such a depression afterwards that it led to her death. I think it was just 5 weeks later that she died.
Nobody wants to read bad reviews about themselves, whether they're crazy because of syphilis or whether they're not crazy. It's always hurtful. And especially if you go so big, like, you know, rent Carnegie Hall and think you have a big success and then read those reviews. I think, yes, it would be shocking for anyone, certainly for her, whether that caused her death. It doesn't really matter whether that's true or not. That's the power of legends, that they inspire you to hear her differently and to look at her differently.
It is very lonely without her. But I feel I have no right to be indignant at losing someone who gave me 36 years of more happiness than most men ever know. Well, I hope I haven't told you too much. Be careful what you say. I feel so defenseless.
His grief when she died was poignant. He wept greatly. All the glamour of the past 36 years was over. No more parties, no more Verdi Club. The cycle had been broken. Naturally, I was sad for him. But it meant he was free now to marry me.
Great art is also great mystery and cannot be measured by any standards except perhaps by its inimitability.
She loved opera so much and wanted so much to be part of it, to belong to it, that she convinced herself that she could do it.
And whether or not she was looking for perfection, that's a whole other cult of people who look for perfection in everything. And somehow that insistence on perfection kills a little bit of creativity.
I do not deny that there's a prism through which you can view her and her history and her life as something admirable, and she certainly wasn't all bad.
I think that's what sets her apart from all her later imitators, that she brings a seriousness to this that goes way beyond what everybody else did. And she's not just some crazy, demented sort of wannabe soprano, because there's a lot of those out there on YouTube, for example, that you can hear today. She really is the real thing, and that guarantees her place in the pantheon of opera for all time.
It took quite some years to fully realize my good fortune that evening with her long ago. Florence Foster Jenkins, eccentric, pretentious, but somehow so endearing. She was, in fact, a genius of her own kind.